I got all done with the vertical fin and the rudder. They're all set up, and I got the cables cut for the rudder. Now it's time to make up the cables for the elevator and for the bungee. I slipped the tubes into the link. I spent most of the day trying to figure out how to line this horizontal stabilizer up so I could get the elevators lined up right and the cables tensioned and get that bungee made right. I got the dimensions for the cables that I need, and then going through all of the information I could find, they're saying with this Dakota Cub yoke on there, the jack screw and the yoke, that the bungee cable needs to be a little bit shorter than one. So I need to make it up to kind of to fit. So anyway, I'm trying to get all that figured out now. I've got the elevator or the horizontal stabilizer on the right side in, and I'm just putting this one on this side in right now just to get this lined up as far as the angles and stuff on it. And so far, measuring it with that angle block, angle cube, the digital angle cube, that I've got it figured out that I've just got enough movement up and down on the jack screw. There's just 2 degrees up or 2.5 degrees up, plus or minus a little bit, and then there's 4 down, plus or minus a little bit. It's within tolerances. There's not any extra up or down, and there's no interference any place so far. Reading through some of the posts and stuff on the different places, some of the places we're getting some interference in it. So anyway, we got that figured out. So I'm gonna put the other elevator on, or the other horizontal stabilizer on, and the other elevator on, and work from that side. I think I can set up all these cables with just having elevator on one side, but it'd be easier to do it with it on the horizontal stabilizer and elevator on the left side instead of the right side, because I'll be working here from the right side. This is where the bench is and everything else, and so I can do all the work from this side and get close up to it. I'm going to first set that up for 0 angle incidence on the horizontal stabilizer, and then it'll be right as far as setting everything up. We've got the horizontal stabilizer up on the left hand side, and I hooked this elevator up to the left hand side to it. Just got the pins in it loose. I've got the brackets here for the elevator cables installed, and I just put short screws in them, so because I'm putting them in here just half, I don't have the whole elevators in. I've cut my first elevator cable. This is the rear one that goes to the forward part of the torque tube, so it goes all the way up underneath the airframe, well, in the middle of the lower part of the airframe underneath the floorboards and stuff, and then goes through that little bulkhead curtain underneath the front seat or the rear seat bar, and then through the guide on the torque tube and down underneath the floorboard underneath the front seat, and then around a pulley 180 degrees and then back to the torque tube. So this is the lower control tube. It's cut plenty long enough. I'll get it on there, and I got the other one ready to cut. So this is what I've got so far. I've got my cable, 1/8 inch cable, and I've got my one terminal end that hooks onto the torque tube crimped on there. I've got the nickel press sleeve, the eye, thimble, the whole works on there. It's all set up, and I clamp that to the 2x4 on the post I taped the tape measure to it first, because I know how long they're supposed to be. This rear one was 204 15/16, and the upper cable, it goes to the upper elevator front. It actually hooks to the rear torque tube, but it's 158 15/16. So I'll just measure that up 162 inches or so, just to give it plenty. I did find a drawing that showed how the cables were measured. I was thinking about just laying them out, measuring them out, and making them up, but I wasn't sure whether the measurements were from the eye of the hookup, the little connector clamp, to the end of the turnbuckle eye, or exactly how the measurements were. Well, I did find a drawing for it, and the measurements are from the end of the inside of the cable eye to the end of the inside of the cable eye, not including the peripheral stuff that it's clamped onto. So I could have measured them out and laid them out and made them up to length like that, but I'm going to go ahead and measure them up to fit the airframe and make them up in the airframe instead. So I'll make them a little longer than what the measurement's supposed to be, so you've got plenty to go around the loop and then back through the nickel press and to hang on to and work with and stuff. I've got both upper and lower elevator cables routed now, hooked up to the torque tube and back here to where they're going to go. Let's see here, they hook into the torque tube right there, that little bracket. There's the eye made with a nickel press sleeve. Make sure that they're over the top of these lower stringers here and under all the ones they're supposed to be here, routed correctly through the pulleys. They are. And the first time I ran that forward cable, I had it, I made sure and laid it on top of these lower crossbar pieces, but I didn't get it in that one little channel right back there. A little boxed in area right there, a little support for underneath the baggage compartment, and I had it routed the wrong way around one of those pieces there, so found that right away before I got it all the way through and pulled it back and routed it where it's supposed to be. I've made sure that the cables don't cross, they're not rubbing on each other any place, they didn't cross or anything, so everything looks good. After hooking those cables up to their respective positions on the elevator, I did find that I needed to change one cable. This upper cable, I had it running right with the lower cable through here and back to that, and that was running underneath this diagonal here. So I had to undo everything and run that cable up over the top of that diagonal. Okay, here's the diagonal that comes down from this mount, for the jack screw, and goes forward there. And that's the one that I had to reroute this cable over the top of for that upper elevator cable. Well, the elevator cables are made up. This upper one here, the lower one, got the sleeves in them, all put together. I've got to make up the bungee cable next, but it has a spring that attaches here. This is the old fitting off the other airplane, the old airframe, for the upper elevator cable, and I put it on because you see they've got large holes in this elevator bell crank, and they're locator holes so you can get the elevators, both of them, lined up properly. I guess there's bushing that goes in here. Well, it doesn't really show it very well. Actually, the parts manual for the Supercub is not very good. You have to use your imagination on a lot of the parts to find them, to see where they go. I have an original copy, Piper copy of the parts manual. I looked in it, and it's a little better, so it's a little easier to find. It did show the bushing that goes in here, and once you know where to look, you can see it and look it up, you can tell that there's a bushing here, but it shows it way up here someplace instead of back here lined up in with this bell crank. I didn't have a bushing. This old fitting here, this old attach fitting, has the bushing built into it, so it just slides in there. It's got a ferrule or well, it's a bushing. It's swedged in there. Anyway, I put it on there to locate all this stuff until I get a bushing for the new one. Now, this one is fine. It had a little pitting and stuff in it. It cleaned up real good, but it does have a little notch here where the spring wore, but I've got a new one before I fully inspected that. So anyway, I'm going to put the new one on. I just have to get a bushing for it to go into this hole. So once I get that bushing on there and set that new one up, I can set the bungee cable up and the spring. And then I've got these cables all set up. I still need to cut the tag ends of them off here, but they're all set up. I can just disassemble these off of the elevator and hang these back here where we can get to them when the time comes to put this all back together and just assemble. Now here's the cables, and I went and borrowed a cable tensionometer and set the cable tension on these, and they're about 40 pounds, and that seems to be about right. Of course, they're both going to be the same because they're interconnected. They're a little over 40 pounds now, and they're pretty tight. Now the instructions for the Supercub assembly is to tighten these up, not too tight, not too loose. There is a bulletin out from Univair that says that the airplanes after 1974, with a type certificate, had to have specifications on the cable tension, and they had the cable's required tension to be 60 pounds plus or minus 2 for the elevator cables. And I tightened these up a little bit more. I had them up to 50 some pounds, and it just was too tight. You could hear the cable sawing into the pulleys and stuff, especially that big pulley up in the front, and everything was really tight. So I readjusted everything, and I've had them 30 pounds. 30 pounds is fine, 35 pounds is fine, but I got them up to 40 pounds now, and that still seems to be okay. You can hear it going around and pulling those pulleys. They're good and tight in the pulleys. You can hear them moving the pulleys and stuff, but it doesn't seem to be sawing into them like it did at 50 pounds plus. I set this angle cube to 0 on the door frame and the window frame. Those are supposed to be the horizontal points on the airplane. So I set this on there and set it to 0, and then adjusted this horizontal stabilizer to match. So I take that, and if I put that over here on the elevator, then you can check the up and down elevator, and it stops at 26 degrees up and 15, a little over 15 degrees down, and according to the book it's 15 degrees down and 25 degrees up. Well, I got my instrument panel in there to make sure I had plenty of clearance in the forward motion of the stick, and I've got plenty of room there. I can get my hand around that at full stick forward and no interference at all. And I think even on the other airplane I had to hold a little bit on full forward stick, but this one's pretty good there. And all the way back, it touches the stop in the back there. It does come into the seat cushion. The only time I ever use it all the way stick back anyway is when I'm taxiing on the water, so that's not going to be a problem either. Well, we've got full motion on it, and it does on. I don't have the stops in for the aileron, so we're going way past the aileron stops here, and we got full motion there. Get that little cutout in there through that bulkhead through the back, and again, this is more motion than we'll have on the ailerons turning, but those elevator control cables don't have any interference at all in that. That's going to be good there. Looking underneath the airplane, this is the front pulley. I still need to put the cotter pin in there on that. It's a keeper to keep that pulley from coming off, or that cable from coming off the pulley. Although at this tension, that cable's not going to come off that pulley. And so there's clearance every place there. There's clearance there. We come back here. This is underneath the passenger seat, and we've got 2 guide pulleys here. They're turning freely. The cable is passing through them just fine. I've got them both lined up real well, and the cable's lined up through that portion. Looking back, the cable's lined up back here all the way. No interference anywhere. All the way back to that second set of pulleys back there. That's underneath the rear of the baggage compartment, the aft baggage compartment. Those pulleys rotate freely, and both cables are fully engaged in the pulleys. As you go on back, cables go back, and there's no interference anywhere with the cables. They just run free and clear. Well, good. I went ahead and cut the tails off of these elevator control cables, I just put a little bit of friction tape around them to keep from getting speared when we're working on them later when we're putting them in. I had these both locked with the idea that we could just disassemble these control ends, these terminal ends, and put it back together again, and all of the tension would be right on. But that proved to be kind of a failure when I took this upper terminal end off. I got a bushing for this so that it fit in there in the hole right and line up with that elevator, and I put the bushing in. I put this new control end on, and when I took the old one off, I could see right away that it wasn't going to work to leave the full tension on those. One of the guys I read online said what he does is put like an 8-penny nail or something in these pivot pinholes, and that way you give enough slack in there that you can get everything lined up with the cables pre-tensioned. But then you've got to try to figure out how to get those pins in there without beating them to death. And I just as soon be able to slide those pins in there easily, and then we can, with these clips that we have for these turnbuckles, it's pretty easy to go ahead and tighten these up and then slip those clips in there, even in a fairly tight spot. You don't have to. It's not like trying to safety wire them with double wrap safety wire and whatever. So that's not that big of a deal. I got the bungee cable made up. The spring is on there. This is the new terminal tab, or end tab, control tab, top one for the elevator. And I got a new spring on there. I got the cable made up for it. It's set up and goes through this pulley. It's hooked in down here on the back side of this yoke, the jack screw yoke. And this is the way the instructions were from the Dakota Cub to set that up. We'll put the control cable in there with a bolt with 3 washers on the inside there for spacers. There's plenty of room in there for that thing to slide around. Anyway, the spring has got a lot of tension in it. When you go, I've got full nose up trim now. The horizontal stabilizer is down all the way, and that has really pulled that elevator up, and it's got a lot of pressure, back pressure on the elevator there, so it takes a pretty strong arm to push on that. I don't know how that's going to work out flying. That spring might be it's pretty strong. I've got it set up for neutral so that the elevators are neutral when the horizontal stabilizer is neutral. So anyway, those cables are all set up. Everything seems to work the way it's supposed to, so now I can take those ends off of there and take those horizontal stabilizer and the elevator off and get it out of the way and work on something else.